So basically, if you eat good proteins and
Hmm.
good varied vegetables, nuts, seeds, fruits, herbs, you're going to help support that natural like GLP-1 secretion, which again
Hmm.
is what drugs like Ozempic are trying to target because that's what helps reduce cravings and turn off that
Hmm.
chatter in the brain. So food wise, those are the things that can help. And then of course, there are resveratrol supplements you can take.
Hmm.
A lot of people talk about the benefits of it in wine. It's pretty minimal in wine, and I don't really recommend alcohol in general. So
Right.
I wouldn't use wine to meet that need, but there are
Hmm.
supplements you can take for that. There's quercetin supplements. There's the black cumin seed oil that you could take for
Hmm.
curcumin.
Today I'm speaking to Elanie and Kay of Renegade Nutrition. They say the status quo is subpar health. As Americans, we have become conditioned to living an unhealthy lifestyle, leading to sickness and disease. We are so conditioned, in fact, that when someone decides to make healthier nutritional choices, we automatically label it as dieting. We want to change that, providing hopeful alternative health options to help other daring renegades forego the status quo. It is our goal to give support, information, and resources for others to live their best lives. Forego the status quo. I'm in for it. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Elanie and Kay of Renegade Nutrition. Thank you so much for being here. I'm here with Elanie Welch and Kay Boyer, the two people in the dynamic duo of Renegade Nutrition. Elanie was here a couple months ago, and we filmed a recording about sugar cravings. And now we're back with Kay as well, and we're going to be diving deeper into some strategies that can help. Elanie, if you could give us just a little recap of our last podcast, that would be really appreciated.
Oh, you betcha. Yeah, so last time I was on, we talked about sugar and why it can create drug-like addictions in our brains. So, what we talked about is the fact that sugar, the pathways by which we taste sweet, send signals to our brain that triggers the release of dopamine. So it's a very similar pathway to what any drug, like street drug or pharmaceutical drug, also can use
Cocaine.
that creates cocaine, that
Mhm.
creates like dependency. So it triggers that dopamine response, which floods our brain with feel-good feelings. And of course, is something that we like to chase as human nature. And also, it suppresses cortisol, the stress response, and adrenaline. And so when we're stressed out and we have sugar, we get this flood of feel good feelings and we sort of suppress the adrenaline and the cortisol and the things that are like flooding our brain at the time. Of course, ultimately, we create a bigger flood of cortisol later, and then that creates inflammation. But the idea is we become addicted because of that flood of good hormones that fills our brain, which over time, the problem with that is that it creates this dependency, this addiction, where we're chasing that feeling, and those receptors can become dulled. So, just like they do in drug addictions, where when somebody has an addiction to, let's say, heroin or cocaine or any other street drug, those receptors, those dopamine receptors become dulled, and our body has to produce more and more and more dopamine, which means we have to get higher and higher amounts of the substance that's creating that dopamine hit. Just like a person who's having heroin has to take higher and higher doses over time to get the same effect, it's the same situation with sugar, which is why you may watch somebody pour like 7 tablespoons of sugar into their coffee drink. And you're like, how could you possibly drink that? It
Mhm.
literally doesn't taste as sweet to them. And their brain needs that amount of sugar in order to release the same amount of dopamine that it used to release with like a teaspoon because they've been having so much over time. So that's kind of a really basic overview recap of the pathway by which we have that sugar addiction creation.
Thank you so much for that recap. I'm fascinated by cravings. I don't know if I told you guys, maybe I told Eleni in in our last meeting, but my dissertation is heavily focused on cravings. I call them urges to binge. My dissertation has focused on body-based strategies, sensory strategies like physiologically based strategies for coping with urges, but part of that involved a deep dive into the literature of like craving, like what is a craving, what are different ways that it's treated. What is interesting is that there's some like what is the difference, like what's the difference between a craving and an urge and a desire, these motivational states, like what do they actually mean? I just want to share a little bit about that. A craving is basically a strong motivational state, and it feels like there's this desire, like this intense desire that feels urgent, so it's called an urge. But a craving is a strong motivational state that can be driven by physiological factors. It can also be driven by psychological factors. It could be like deprivation, hormonal changes, stress, and environmental cues. And the cravings can be a precursor and a consequence of various behaviors and conditions, so you might have a craving and that leads you to binge, right? But then because you binge, especially if you're binging on ultra processed foods, then the result is cravings. So that's how it could be a precursor or a consequence of barriers of behaviors and conditions. So a lot of people, the majority of individuals in the world experience food cravings, and they're very common. And cravings, just not even for food, but just in general, they're really common and not inherently problematic. Cravings is like how we know that we're alive because we want food and we want sex and we want emotional intimacy with friends and so forth. It's not inherently problematic, but the thing is that cravings can lead to maladaptive patterns, and research has linked cravings to substance use relapse. Food cravings are linked to binge eating and bulimic behavior. And the cravings can feel pesky and they feel uncomfortable in our body, and they can actually interfere with cognitive performance. So if you're experiencing a craving, it can feel like nothing else matters, and all you start to focus, you get tunnel vision on the food, and the cognitive resources are focused on how do I get the food, what it's going to feel like, those sort of aspects. And so your ability to focus on other things, such as your executive function and what you had said that you were going to do, that all kind of goes out the window. I know that you guys have other videos on cravings, and I also have some other videos on cravings, like how to reduce cravings, I think is the name of the video. But today we're going to talk about stuff that we haven't covered before for the most part. And I want to ask you, what does a sugar craving feel like for you guys in your body? Like when you're experiencing a sugar craving, what does it feel like?
Okay, you answer this one to start
Oh,
because
yeah.
it's the more recently sugar addicted one.
Yes. Okay. And I should explain how I know Elanie. So Elanie was my nutritionist, and I came to her and I was addicted to sugar. And she said, she was like, okay, I said, I have like a crash in the afternoon. And she was like, okay, so we're going to try to cut you off your sugar. And I was like, no, ma'am, we will not be doing that. Like I can do fine. So I think it took like 2 years. I did actually listen to her, and it took like months to finally get off of it. Now I'm like, it's been 3 years, maybe, Eleni, and I don't have crave sugar anymore. I'm good. I do, and we'll talk about this later too, about the alternative sweeteners. I do have Lily's chocolate every day, which is sweetened with stevia. And Eleni's
Mhm.
sort of like, you know what? I think you should do cold turkey for everyone. But my personality, I still need a couple tablespoons of that a day. And I eat
Mhm.
so healthy in my life. That's my little vice. And I'm just going to keep
Mhm.
my little cocaine chocolate. Okay. Not true cocaine. Please, we don't support that. But okay. So that's the only little bit I have. I can't even handle like honey and maple syrup, like throws me. I can't even do that. And mine is more of a mental game and an
Mm.
energy thing. So okay, wait. So now that was just the history of why I'm here and why I'm talking. But when I want sugar, I'm trying to think the feeling. I like literally just want it. You can't stop me. I don't care. For me, it's more this mental, like I want it, I'm going to have it. And there's such a
Mhm.
short span between that thought, and I need to fulfill that immediately.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think in my body if I even like, I don't even think I'm self-aware enough to even be cognizant of that feeling. I should work on
Well, I
that.
mean, it sounds like you're not even in your body. It sounds like
Yeah.
it's just mental.
Oh, totally mental. And since we're just being really, really honest on this
Yeah.
show, my friend, okay, we also do not support Ozempic because, okay, listen, but my friend, I was like, I'm going to dabble with this. I'm not overweight at all. It's all mental, friends. And I'm just trying to be honest. We don't support this, but she was like, you should try this. And I was like, well, it's not healthy, but okay, I'm just going to do a couple doses of it. this is what was interesting. My personality is very craving and very, I just want and that hit. And I'm an ENFP, I'm a visionary. I love that feeling. And I'm very like, I think forward in my head. So having the Ozempic, if I shouldn't even say those words, it was so amazing for me, but it cut off my cravings. And that was just so magical. And even the cravings in my life, like I was able to be happy with what I had in the moment, even just like, my husband's good enough. This meal is good enough. Like my bank account's good enough. It was just such an interesting, okay, now the side effects are not worth it. I had to get off it. I gained all the weight back I had off. It's a terrible idea. But here's what I want to say is, it is so interesting that modern America, that we're in a place where we're dopamine deficient all day on our phones, where we're in a place that we need something that can handle our cravings to just make us normal again. Like, this is like wild to me. So anyway, long story long here. I do not support Ozempic. I really am liking what you're doing here, Christina, is like, how can we manage our cravings a natural way where we don't have to rely on a pharmaceutical to make us normal again? Like, that's my life's journey, is really just coming back to like, okay, in this moment, you have enough. You are enough. Quit wanting more. Okay, go ahead.
I think that's so good. I'm glad you're just so honest about that, Kay. And I think that's such an important point that you brought up is
Yeah.
like social media literally zaps our dopamine because it's the same thing, right? It creates this short-circuited reward pathway. So
Yeah.
every time we see a like, that creates a little dopamine hit. Every time we have a new follower, that creates a little dopamine hit. And it's the same as sugar and the same as addictive drugs, where you need more and more of that over time.
Mhm.
And you're right, we're so dopamine deficient now as a like country, as a Western
Mhm.
lifestyle, because whether we're addicted to social media or we're addicted to shopping or we're addicted to sugar, we're addicted to drugs, whatever it ends up being, we endogenously start creating less and less dopamine
Mhm.
because our body is trying to balance out all of these hits. And so it's like our body wants to be in a state of homeostasis. So if you're spiking your dopamine all the time, then endogenously you'll produce less because your body is trying to balance that out, which then puts you in that dopamine dependent state, which then, like you said, you're filled with all these cravings because your body is looking for anything that creates dopamine.
Mhm.
Because it's not just sugar, it's not just drugs, it's also experiences, which we'll talk about, which can be used for positive. Experiences can create dopamine hits in our bodies. And so we just become cravey. Like we just
Mhm.
want something all the time. We're craving experience, we're craving a new person, we're craving a new relationship, we're craving a substance, we're craving a food, whatever it is, because we're so unbalanced in our dopamine. So I'm glad you shared that. And I'll share it too. I could tell Kay was addicted to sugar because she had that kind of classic angry response when
Yeah.
I was like, when I was like, I think sugar's your problem, because she was like, well, I'm having this like histamine response and inflammation. And I was like, well, the only thing you're eating, like you have a pretty good diet otherwise, but you
Mhm.
are eating a lot of sugar. And I think if you cut out the sugar, and she was like me, like, no, it's not the problem. And like, no, I'm not gonna quit it. And thanks for your advice. But it
Yeah,
is that
quit
like
talking. Yeah.
yeah, it's like that addictive is like they get angry, they get defensive, and they're in denial, which is
Mhm.
oftentimes signs
Mhm.
of those addictions. So I think that was like for me a little bit of a telltale. And I was like, okay, well, just do what you think is best then. And then it was like a couple months later, Kay came back and was like, I did end up cutting out sugar, and you were right.
And I feel worlds better, and thank you.
We've been friends ever since.
Aw,
Yeah, yeah.
what a heartwarming tale.
Yeah, right. You're like
I
my
think
sponsor, Elanie.
I think that this actually could be like a really great example of maybe expressing the principles that maybe we talked about perhaps going over today. I know that from the last podcast, you insinuated that there was some things to share about alternatives to sweetener. How do you know if someone should just cold turkey off of sugar or if they should do gradations? And it sounds like with Kay, you led her through some things, and now she's in a stable place where she feels she has a sustainable relationship. And I'm wondering, if you could share the unmentionables, because I'm going to let you share it, but like maybe using Kay as an example of how you worked with these principles.
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, it's important to understand why you're craving the sugar, why you started craving it in the first place, because physiologically speaking, there may be different reasons. And one of them is that if you have insulin resistance or imbalanced blood sugar, you will crave sugar when your body is experiencing a crash. And so it's kind of a little bit of a chicken and the egg situation, but the more sugar you have, the more you'll crave it because the more rises and crashes you'll create. So every time you have a crash, your body will naturally crave the thing that will balance it out the quickest, which is sugar. So that's a normal, healthy response of our, like, for our body, because back in the days when sugar wasn't abundantly available, we needed some of those quick fixes to say, like, run away from a saber-toothed tiger. So we needed what carbohydrates we could find because they were hard to find. So that was like evolutionary and advantageous. But now sugar is abundant and it's easy to find. And so the problem is twofold. One is we're consuming too much because it's so available. And the other is that as soon as we have a dip, we can reach for something that's unhealthy because it's so abundantly available. So that's one reason. You could be having insulin resistance, and it's important to understand that. Another reason could be that you have candida and yeast overgrowth. And this is really fascinating to me because it's the gut-brain connection. But literally, candida and yeast can send signals to your brain that make you crave sugar because that's what they feed on. So they're actually like controlling you. If you have a candida overgrowth and you are craving sugar all the time, it's not because your body needs it, it's because the fungus want it. You're like a zombie and they're
I think
Crazy.
I had,
Isn't that
and
crazy?
I think I had the candida overgrowth, and I think I've killed it off. Yeah, absolutely.
And so the good news is, like, whether or maybe it's just a habit you've created, and again it's that like it's that dependency, it's that addiction, right? And then that might be why you're craving sugar, because it's the easily accessible thing for a dopamine hit. So there could be a multitude of reasons, and that's not even all of them, right? There's other things, like if you're magnesium deficient, you'll crave sweets more often. But the good news is you don't have to know the reason per se, because the reset for basically all of those problems is quitting cold turkey and not having sugar for at least 30 days. You oftentimes hear it takes 21 days to break a habit. That's actually, and I've said it myself in the past, I've since learned that that's actually not true. Some people do break a habit in 21 days, but some people it takes a lot longer. It could take months. Some people are shorter. I say at least 30 days, no sugar, no sweets, because you're breaking that pathway. If there's an addictive pathway, you're beginning the process of breaking that. And if you have candida, it's a good amount of time to begin killing off the candida because they feed on sugar. And I'm really saying, like, that's pretty hardcore no sugar. So people are thinking maybe white refined sugar, brown sugar, honey, or maple syrup, but it means bread, because bread is sugar. It digests just like sugar in our body. And it means grains a lot of times, like especially things like oats that are really fast to digest and create sugar.
Hmm.
And it's not that those things are inherently bad. It's that if you have that overgrowth of candida, you have to avoid the things that can break down quickly into sugars and feed them. It can mean grains, it can mean things like oats, it can mean bread, it can mean even fruit, and being really careful about fruit. Even though it has fiber and that slows down the release of sugar into our bloodstream, we still have to be cognizant of how much carbohydrate material we're putting into our body because they break down into sugars. And so even beneficial things like fruit, we have to avoid for a period of time in order to control those yeast. But once you do that and you reset your gut microflora, then you'll stop having those sugar cravings and you can probably eventually incorporate some of those things back in unless it disagrees with your physiology and your gut health. And then it's the same for if you're having insulin resistance, it's the same protocol that I walk people through. If you cut
Hmm.
sugar cold turkey, if you don't have the refined sugars, if you avoid the grains, if you avoid the breads, if you avoid even sometimes the fruit, except for like lower glycemic fruits, then that can balance your insulin as well. With insulin resistance, it takes a long time to reset that system. So it's a longer pathway. And candida can be tricky too, because they can come and they can go. And there's other things you can add into that. But my long-winded answer is that's at least 30 days, ideally 60 to 90. And you'll find once you do it for 30, you can keep going, but ideally longer. If you are avoiding sugar, you'll break the pathway of addiction if it's there. You'll reset your gut microbiome and you can balance your blood sugar. So you basically eliminate the root cause of most of those reasons why we have sugar cravings. So that 30 days minimum, no sugar, nothing sweet can be enough sometimes to do that.
And I was going to add in that, okay, and there are different types of personalities, right? Where Elanie has said that she's more of an all or nothing person, and I am a moderate person. I mean, I'm kind of extreme in some things, but in behavior, I tend to moderate. And so I noticed that I did need the cold turkey I did do her first 21 days of cold turkey. And then after that, since I'm a stubborn lady, I still did my own way of like the honey and the molasses or with syrup, whatever. But what I noticed is for me, I also have that personality type. Have you like you can't tell me what to do, but you can tell me what I can do. So I would just be like, oh, well, I can have stevia or I can have this. So for me, it was a longer journey. Like it really did take me like 2 years of checking in on my body. And I would do really good, but then I would do the alternative, like the honey and stuff, and then maybe a piece of bread. And it took me 2 years to check in and be like, get better each time, get better each time. And now that we're like 2 or 3 years out, now I don't touch any of it. I don't want any of it, but it took me being gradual, I think is what I'm saying. So if it takes time for someone, that's okay too. I did do the cold turkey at first to just get that heavy addiction out of me. And then I had to do it in the long game, I guess.
At first, Kate, when you were reincorporating the sources of sugar that you were experimenting with, you were saying syrup and honey. Did you find that you were going overboard with them, or what was going on? You said that now you've kind of reached your equilibrium, but like what was going on in your process to get to where you were?
Yeah, that's pretty fair to like, since I am kind of that cravey personality, I would like my main meals are good. Like I'm pretty disciplined, I'm pretty good, but I would do these like cravey afternoony snacks that I didn't even realize I was doing it, but I would make like these like paleo brownies, but just with like a ton of like, gosh, I don't use them, dates. Remember when dates were
Mm-hmm.
like, I even like, yeah, I would go overboard on dates, overboard on honey, which is like the silliest thing to go overboard on. But yeah, you're right. It kind of took that. And then I'd step down from that. But it's like I couldn't even control myself. But okay, 2 to 3 years later, now I can. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Eleni, when you work with clients, is that kind of a typical pattern, or do many of your clients just kind of stay no sugar, or do a lot of them find a sugar sweetener? I'm just curious, what's your experience, maybe in your own experience, or like what's a typical one with a client?
Yeah, I think long term, that's a pretty common pattern. If we can get people past that 30 days, maybe 60 days, maybe 90 days, again, it depends on the person and the level of the issue. Like if it's an addiction, how addicted they are, if it's a candida overgrowth, how bad it is. And, at the same time, we're taking care of their gut and we're taking care of their mineral deficiencies. So it just depends how quickly they respond to that. But I say long term, what is most sustainable for most people is finding a substitute that works so that they don't feel like they can never have something sweet again. Just like mentally, I think that that's a challenge for people. If they're thinking, I'll never be able to have this again, it almost always creates this barrier. Whereas if we say, okay, we're going to go hardcore for 30, 60, 90 days, whatever it ends up being, And then after that, we'll start building things back in. People tend to do a lot better with that and stick to it for that time period. The secret being that when they get to the end of that time period, they're not going to want the same things they did before they started, mostly. So I don't have to
Mm-hmm.
tell them that. I just know that that's what's going to happen because you reset your taste buds even. So that regular food like bell peppers and carrots, you can actually begin to taste the sugars in those because your
Mm-hmm.
taste buds aren't so dulled. So I find that normal food begins to taste more sweet and they begin to sort of meet that need through more healthy foods. But I have found that if people can incorporate alternatives on occasion, it just creates a healthier relationship with food long term where they're not fearful of it, but they also aren't dependent on it. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that's a pretty common pattern. And there are, which we could talk about, I want to leave room for if you wanted to go into this or not, but there are alternatives that don't create dependencies like sugar does. So in the long run, you can swap in some of those alternatives and it shouldn't create a new addiction. But if you are already addicted, it's simply the pattern of sweet that can maintain that craving. And
Mm-hmm.
so while you may not be releasing dopamine in your brain like you do with sugar with these alternatives, you're still maintaining the habit and the craving, which is different than an addiction. So you could break the addiction, which is great, but you may maintain the habit if you just go straight from sugar to, let's say, stevia or honey, you're not breaking your habit of needing something sweet after a meal, which means you're not depleting that craving or diminishing that craving, which means you'll still kind of maintain that pathway where you need something. And that's where I'm trying to get people away from. It's okay
Mm-hmm.
to have those things on occasion, but if you need them, like if you finish a meal and you need something sweet, that's the pattern I like to free people from because it is a
Mm-hmm.
dependency in its own way.
There is a supplement called Kachava that I love. I used to have it all the time, and it's like a chocolate, a lot of like healthy, I
It's
don't know
like a
what it,
protein
it's like
powder.
a protein, yeah, and it's real.
Mm-hmm.
It is good for you enough. But I was having that when I was running, just busy, grab it on the go. I ate mostly whole foods, but that was like my special little treat. And then I don't know who brought it up. Maybe Elanie did. It was like, gosh, I wonder what the carbs it is in that. And I looked at it. It's like 18 carbs in a serving, and that was I only had like a year ago. And then I was like, oh, we interviewed a guy with good health, and his same exact protein powder is even cleaner, better for you, and only has like
two
six or
net
eight. Oh,
two net carbs.
or maybe two net. Yeah, net. Yeah. So then I switched to that. And that was the kachava. I just like, oh, my healthy protein. I'm just going. I'm not even thinking about it.
It was
When
like
my,
your sweet treat. Like you would have that
yeah,
and it would be like your sweet treat because it was almost like you could have like a milkshake, but it would be a
yeah.
protein powder.
Yeah, and it didn't have any real sugar in it. It was stevia, so it's like my cheat. But honestly, when we switched to now, I do good health. I don't even do it every day anymore. But only being that six carb, it made everything feel better because then I wasn't craving it later.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny how just something small like that was in my life. I didn't even realize it. And then once I got it out, I just feel so much better and freer and just wild. Anyway,
Yeah, just the carbs. I mean, it was like the carbs
yeah,
were the problem, which again is like we think sugar and we think the white table sugar,
yeah,
but sugar can also be in carbs. And so I think even having that like higher carb protein powder was like
Mm-hmm.
still releasing
yeah,
blood sugar or like releasing sugar into your bloodstream, which then was causing a spike and a crash and then making you crave more carbs later on. So yeah,
yeah,
it takes a lot of like intuition, and I
yeah.
often encourage people to journal during that time period, even though that can feel tedious. I'm not by nature a journaler, but it can be such a helpful tool when you're going through a process like that to document how you're feeling, what your mood is like,
Mm-hmm.
what your like body and digestion feels like, because otherwise you are less perceptive to those things as they're happening. So for Kay, like if she was journaling, she would realize, okay, I'm having this kachava in the morning, and 2 hours later, I'm hungry and I'm craving
Mm-hmm.
something. So, like, maybe I'll try swapping out the cachava. Instead of doing that, I'll have eggs and sausage or eggs and bacon. Oh, now it's like 4 hours before I'm hungry
Mhm.
and I'm not craving anything. So I think when you start documenting those things, it can be really helpful.
Absolutely. It's so true.
Yeah, I think taking an inventory is really important. A lot of us just kind of like go on autopilot and we're not really thinking, but if we're experiencing cravings, it is so helpful to make a note of like, what did I eat? How is my energy? How's my craving level? How is my satiety? And the ingredients in some things, we're not aware, like protein powder,
Mhm.
they have a lot of artificial flavors, sweeteners, things that they could trigger cravings if someone's sensitive and it has, maltodextrin and who
Mhm.
knows what other things in it, and they think it's just protein powder. But yeah, but it also has all these other things that you're not considering. But then you can make the connection if you're being attentive, like, oh, this is the thing that I consumed, and now I'm experiencing this craving, or I'm hungry, like pretty much immediately after consuming it. And then you realize that there can be things that are making an impact on you that you hadn't realized. So I think that that's a great exercise to journal and to make note of the relationship between what you're eating and how you're feeling afterwards.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I think you could talk more to this too, Christina, but there's a lot of benefit in filling your body with protein and fat because those things
Mhm.
balance your blood sugar and can counteract that insulin response and that insulin imbalance that makes us crave sweets. So when I take somebody through this protocol of going cold turkey on the sugar, what I make sure we do is fuel their body with things that will give them sustained energy and help mitigate those cravings because I don't want somebody to cut sugar out and feel totally miserable because they're craving it all the time and they don't have energy. I want them to replace it with something that will build energy. And so that is oftentimes working around 30 plus grams of protein a meal and getting lots of good healthy fats, which does include some animal fats because animal fats are very nourishing to our body. A lot of the myths surrounding cholesterol and hypertension and that it comes from consumption of animal fats. Actually, a lot of our elevated cholesterol comes from consumption of dietary sugars, and that's a whole thing in
Mm-hmm,
itself.
mm-hmm.
But animal fats have a lot of vitamins A, D, and K in them. And so it's important and it's kind of deficient. Like when we switched out lard for Crisco, which is like corn oil or cottonseed oil, when we made that change, that's when heart disease really started to rise. Returning to those more nourishing fats and proteins that give our body sustained energy is a really powerful and effective way to balance our blood sugar and then help us avoid some of those cravings that come with like a blood sugar crash where our body needs something right that second to feel better, where you can have eggs if you're tolerant of them, eggs and bacon or eggs and sausage and veggies for breakfast, and you're going to have protein, fat, and fiber, and you're going to fuel your body for hours, and you may not feel hungry again until 1 p.m. And that's a really good feeling. And then you feel yourself the same way at lunch, and it carries you all the way through to dinner. And soon dinner is there, and you haven't been making poor dietary choices all day. So you're able to make another good choice for dinner. And then you sleep well. And sleep's a huge contributor. So, anyway, we can get into all of that. And maybe you want to touch more on the dietary piece. But that to me is so important is you're not just cutting out the carbs, you're replacing them with healthy fats and proteins.
Yeah, I'm just going to give some snaps because I think that is, I think it is hugely important. And I'm totally on the same page, 30 plus grams of protein. Even if you're a woman, maybe some women are like, what? That sounds like a lot. But I think it's really important in keeping us nourished, and making sure that there's animal fat involved in that meal as well. I think that is a foundation of keeping cravings at bay is not just cutting stuff out, but making sure that you are nourishing yourself well. Because I know some people think, okay, I'm gonna nourish myself well. Let me eat this little rabbit salad or something.
Mhm.
And it's like,
Mhm.
no, of course, that's where people might go wrong because they have this preconception of like a healthy meal is like a tiny sliver of chicken breast and a little bit of salad with no dressing or like a little bit of vinegar or something. But it's like, no, you need protein, you need fat. And so you need to get that steak inside of you, you get the eggs in, bacon if that works for you, the non-starchy vegetables if that works for you, or just finding the combination that works for you. But certainly protein being abundant in a person's diet, in my orientation, animal-based protein is important. I do want to talk about sleep, but I'm wondering if we could just like throw out some of our favorite meals that we think exemplify this 30 plus grams
Yeah.
of protein
Mm.
that has protein and fat. Okay, I'm gonna say sirloin and bone broth.
Ooh, yeah.
Amazing. I was like, I would eat that. Yeah, I'm like a steak and broccoli all day long.
Okay.
What else? Gosh. I've been doing a lot of like a Mexican bowl with like a bunch of ground beef, lettuce, salsa, cheese, and just like piling that on, but tons of ground beef where it's like mostly ground beef.
Love it.
Gosh, any pot roast? I
Mm.
know.
Okay.
Gosh.
Yeah, my
I
husband and I slow cook a lot of meat. So like last
Ooh.
Mm,
night we put a chicken in a big stock pot in the oven and cooked it overnight at 220. And then like that is breakfast and lunch and it's
Mm.
got all the broth. So I'll do all
mm.
the broth with it and all the
Mm-hmm.
skin, like all the delicious chicken skin is so good with it. And then we'll steam. I'm making myself hungry.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was like. Yeah.
I'll steam some broccoli or I'll do cauliflower rice or
Mm.
Brussels
Hmm.
sprouts or we make homemade fermented sauerkraut. I love to have that on
Hmm.
Ooh.
because
On a
like
bratwurst.
yeah, a day
Mhm.
that like I don't like let's say it's an evening and we have like a chiropractor appointment or something we have to get to. It's so nice to like we'll buy an animal share. So
Oh,
get
cool.
get our own like brats from our animal share, from our pork share, throw those on the stove and do like a cup of that sauerkraut. And then that's like the veggie I
Mhm.
have. I didn't have to do any prep. I literally took it out of our jar.
Yep.
And we're pretty simple, right? Like we're not fancy, but oh yeah, I'm like I love pork chops. I love
Mm.
steak. I
Hmm.
love our like brats from our animal shares that I know are good
Mm-hmm.
quality, clean
Yeah.
ingredients. And I love the like slow cooked chicken. We'll buy a chicken share,
Mm.
so we only have whole chickens. So like we'll just cook
Mm.
a whole chicken at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much any, yeah, meat on a platter. I'm pretty satisfied.
Satisfied.
Then
Oh
I
yeah,
don't
that's the
need
whole
dessert
road.
after. Steak
Yeah.
or cake? I'm
Mm-hmm.
eating the steak. Yeah, yeah.
I like
Okay.
that steak
Yeah,
or cake.
yeah,
And eggs are so good too,
yes.
Yeah.
right now if you don't have access to local farmer, now is the time to get it because like egg prices are
Mhm.
just skyrocketing, right?
Right?
We have backyard chickens and that makes me feel really secure. I can't have eggs right now because my daughter is still breastfeeding and she's
Okay.
allergic to eggs, which is really
Ah.
Mm.
sad. Hopefully she'll grow out of that. She'll be two soon.
Hmm.
But otherwise, if you're not allergic, if you don't have a sensitivity, that's a really great one too, because it's like
Mm-hmm.
the perfect balance of amino acids. Because it's literally the thing that gives life to a chick, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
yolk has all the right amino acids, all the fats, all the proteins, everything in the right balance to give life. So eggs are such a good option too for people. And an egg is like 6 grams of protein. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're just having one egg for breakfast, that is not a 30-gram
Hmm.
protein breakfast.
No.
Hmm.
No.
Protein was so helpful in my cravings slash mental wellness.
It's
Lori Hammer is an amazing woman from Iowa. What's her title? What does she do, Eleni?
she's like a naturopathic therapist, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
But she does amino acid therapy, and
Mm-hmm.
her brain, for her own mental wellness, she took on kind of a therapeutic amount of amino acids and cured herself.
She
And
had binge eating disorder. So she
yeah,
was suffering from a binge eating disorder and
yeah.
ended up going through a program where she balanced her amino acids
Hmm.
and then overcame that issue because
Yes.
her brain was being fueled correctly.
Yeah, so hand in hand with what we're saying. So I'm very cognizant of the amino acids I take in, and it
Mm-hmm.
makes me feel so whole and fulfilled that been a game changer, and it's all linked in with the protein. So good.
Wonderful. There's Eleni, do you know the name of the book off the top of your head? I believe it's called the Amino Cure. It has a whole protocol for taking amino acids for binge eating and so forth. So the book I was referencing was The Diet Cure by Julia Ross.
I liked it, and she's developing one that has like 22 types of amino acids or something. She's really doing some cool research with that. So yeah.
Cool. So, do you guys want to talk a little bit? Speaking of amino acids, we could talk a little bit about some supplements. For example, glutamine. Glutamine is something that helps pe some people with cravings. So there's bad. If I'm not sure if you guys know examine.com, but that's a pretty
Hmm.
cool website that lists a lot of studies regarding any supplement that you type in, and then it'll come up with different studies regarding it. So
Cool.
examine.com is a cool site, just FYI. But
Cool.
glutamine, for example, has a lot of research regarding it. And for example, a systematic review in 2020 looked at how glutamine supplementation affects metabolic health in people with diabetes. And that study found that glutamine can help people improve their blood sugar through its effect on hormones. Glutamine can be useful for reducing cravings by influencing. It's hypothesized that it works through that mechanism by influencing the appetite regulating hormones. Some people think that even just 1 to 3 grams of glutamine can be helpful when a craving occurs for different purposes, like post-workout. A lot of times they say, for recovery, do 5 grams of glutamine, but for cravings, it can be less, even just some people say even just 1 gram of glutamine can be helpful for cravings.
Amazing. Yeah. Do you have others? I was like, I can pull up my presentation really quick we did an episode that was basically like beyond Ozempic and natural ways
Mm.
to inhibit like the same molecules that GLP-1 go through that same pathway that Ozempic works, where you can have alternatives that are healthy. And I can pull that up. But if you have others,
Yeah. Well, does your inositol? I was going to mention.
inositol is one of them. And
Mhm.
I, not necessarily on the craving side of things,
Mm-hmm.
but as far as balancing blood sugar, one of my favorites
Yeah.
is black cumin seed oil, which
Never
when
heard
I'm
of it.
taking somebody through the process of, if what we're seeing on their blood work is that they're like insulin resistant, then that's one of the things I incorporate. So yeah, black cumin seed oil has been used for thousands and thousands of years. Like it comes from
Wow.
ancient Egyptian times. And it's very, very effective anti-inflammatory. So I've seen it a lot like for athletes, competitive athletes, because it can reduce like injury inflammation and then like post-workout fatigue. But
Mm-hmm.
it's also really powerful for balancing your blood sugar. So for somebody who's suffering from like PCOS or
Mm-hmm.
insulin resistance, that's one of the top ones I recommend because it's so good across the board. And I like whole food supplements. So I like the amino acids. I like things that are like
Mm-hmm.
acerola cherry powder, like whole food vitamin C. I like whole food,
Mm-hmm.
like I like fish oil. That's like
Yeah.
fish
Yeah.
oil. I like the black cumin seed oil where it's like it's that pressed ingredient as opposed to isolated ingredients because I do think nutrients are meant to work together as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to in isolation. So anytime it can be like a whole food source, I like that.
Is that do you take it as an oil or is it in a capsule?
There's both. There's both
Both.
options.
Okay.
I take it as an oil. When I learned about it, people made a big deal about the taste because it's like
Hmm.
a little bit spicy, a little
That's
bit.
what I was thinking.
It
Yeah.
has kind of like a black licorice flavor, which
Oh.
I just heard a lot of complaints about it. When I tried it, I was like, this is nothing. It doesn't bother me. I actually kind of like it. I just watered it down a little bit. It was no big
Mhm.
deal.
Okay, fair. Oh, now I want to try it. Okay.
And I like the Zatic Naturals brand for that Zatik is the one that I like.
Okay, while you're pulling up your document, Eleni, I'll just talk about inositol. A small double-blind crossover study examined inositol as a therapeutic tool in individuals with binge eating behaviors, and they were actually administered a pretty large dose of 18 grams of inositol daily for 6 weeks, and that resulted in significant improvements in eating patterns. Inositol has also been shown to improve insulin sensitivity, leading to more stable blood sugar levels. And in that way, it might help to reduce sugar cravings. Even just 2 to 3 grams of inositol twice daily may help diminish sugar cravings. And also, there's been other research. Again, this is something that any person can pull up on examine.com, or they do have access to journal articles. Inositol can help with sleep, it can help with anxiety. Exactly the mechanism behind how inositol can help it could be indirectly through sleep or anxiety or through other ways through blood sugar. But even just a few grams, similarly to glutamine, just a small amount of it, even though like in this one study that was examining binge eating, they use 18 grams a day. But it's just showing it's relatively safe at larger doses, but even just smaller doses can seem to make an impact too. So that's just something that people may be able to experiment with if they are interested in purchasing some online and seeing how that might help their sugar cravings.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I had in my notes from that podcast episode when we're supporting that GLP-1 pathway, which is the same thing that like Ozempic does, but
Mm-hmm.
like a
Mm-hmm.
manufactured way of doing it. Things you can do to support it is like nutrition, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
high fiber, like foods, vegetables, nuts, avocados, and eggs, and high protein foods like yogurt and whey, if you're not sensitive to whey, can increase and influence GLP-1 secretion. And you can also support it with targeted probiotics like Akkermansia, specifically like that strain. Akkermansia, is it muciniphila? Those stimulate GLP-1 levels. So all of that can help with those cravings and it can help like reduce that. It turns off the chatter in the brain,
Mm-hmm.
basically. And then also curcumin, which would be the active ingredient in that black cumin seed oil that
Mm-hmm.
I talked about. And then ginseng, which comes from legumes and soy, but I don't recommend soy how we do it in the US. Like if you want to
Mm-hmm.
eat fermented traditional soy like Japanese cultures do, go for it. It looks like snot to me, but it's really like the only way that like soy consumption is healthy
Awesome.
for you. Um, and then apigenin is another component that can increase GLP-1 production, and that's found in vegetables like parsley, celery, onions, and fruits like oranges and herbs, including chamomile, thyme, oregano, basil, and then some plant-based beverages like tea. Luteolin can help with GLP-1 secretion, and that's found in carrots, peppers, celery, olive oil, peppermint, thyme, rosemary, and oregano. Procyanidin is found in flowers, so if you eat edible flowers, which are fun and pretty.
Mhm.
Nuts, fruits, bark, and seeds, resveratrol, which is most abundant in grapes, and quercetin, which we would find in onions, grapes, berries, cherries, broccoli, and citrus fruits. So basically, if you eat good proteins and
Mm-hmm.
good varied vegetables, nuts, seeds, fruits, herbs, you're going to help support that natural like GLP-1 secretion, which again
Mm-hmm.
is what drugs like Ozempic are trying to target because that's what helps reduce cravings and turn off that
Mm-hmm.
chatter in the brain. So food wise, those are the things that can help. And then of course, there are resveratrol supplements you can take.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people talk about the benefits of it in wine. It's pretty minimal in wine, and I don't really recommend alcohol in general. So
Right.
I wouldn't use wine to meet that need, but there are
Mm-hmm.
supplements you can take for that. There's quercetin supplements. There's the black cumin seed oil that you could take for
Mm-hmm.
curcumin. So there are supplements for all of those things, and you can get them from food. So if you want to save and not have to supplement quite as much, you can eat a diet that incorporates and emphasizes at least those foods and herbs and nuts and seeds that we talked about.
I think that's great points. Those are great points. Nutrition, basically nutrition is really important and that can do much in helping to reduce cravings.
Yeah.
And electrolytes. Electrolytes,
Yes.
Yeah.
I think is an important thing to take into consideration.
All balance.
Um, yeah, if you're craving, especially something salty, it could be that it's your body's way of signaling that you need to restore your electrolyte balance, that you're missing something. And so maybe, taking some electrolytes, I would recommend unflavored elementi. I don't even know if that's the way that you pronounce it.
I
Element.
always
Yeah, I
say
think it's
element.
element. Element.
Element.
Okay, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
element.
That's
Element.
what I say, but I
Um,
don't know that that's right.
Yeah, I think
yeah,
element. Yeah.
okay, element unflavored. That's the one that I recommend, just because I try to keep things, with low artificial sweeteners and so forth.
Yep.
But also just like having a tiny sprinkle of salt, like in a glass of water or just like in your mouth, I think is also something that could be helpful if someone has a craving. If it's due to electrolytes and that's going to be helpful. Or, I mean, but if it's not related to that, no harm in taking a tiny bit of salt or having some
Mhm.
electrolytes. If anything, it's just going to be helpful.
Eleni, what about, did you comment on berberine? That's kind of a hot topic.
I didn't have that in my note.
Okay.
But yeah, there are like berberine supplements. And there's tons of things outside of my notes too, right? Like
Yeah, right.
probably like 50 plant pseudocol
Yes. Yes.
that could like contribute to that. And yeah, berberine's kind of like the hot one that's going
Yep.
right now. In my experience, like I've used it for other things rather than like
Hmm.
sweet cravings, but it could be helpful in that
Give it a
regard.
try. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, something that comes to my mind when I think about how to deal with cravings, and we're talking about nutritional strategies or supplements, because there's so many ways to. I mean, the great thing is there's many ways to support cravings. The
Mhm.
sad thing is that we don't have time to talk about all of them today, because there's also like cognitive behavioral strategies, mindfulness-based strategies.
Yep.
Exercise has been shown to help with cravings, like doing high intensity intervals. But I mean, there's a boatload of ways that potentially can make a difference. But today we're kind of focusing on nutrition and supplements. But one thing that comes to mind speaking about nutrition is eating a big ass steak. And
Mhm.
I don't want to say it like that, but basically I what I'm thinking about is that
Yes.
I did strict carnivore in the past.
Hmm.
And right now I would say I do kind of more of a ketovore approach, but I'm involved
Yeah.
in different carnivore communities. It's really interesting because I don't want to say that I'm a voyeur, but I'm kind of a voyeur. So for example, I'm part of various communities, but I'm thinking about one in particular where they have a WhatsApp group. If someone's like, man, I'm feeling like crazy cravings right now, their immediate inclination is like, fill yourself up with protein and fat. Like, go eat a bunch of bacon, eat a big ass steak, even eat butter, like just
Hmm.
fill yourself up with things that are not going to lead to a huge cycle of crash and cravings, such as, pints of ice cream, which is, let's say probably what the person has been craving is like, I'm craving these ultra processed foods. And I would say the carnivore reaction is not like, well, what's behind it?
Mhm.
Can you do a distract and delay technique? That's not their
Mhm.
response. Their response is like, eat some fucking steak, get
Uh-huh.
some steak in your belly, eat some bacon,
Uh-huh.
so it's like replacing, like, it's still eating, but it's
Hmm.
eating something that hopefully will satiate your body. And yeah, it's still like the actual physical process of mastication and swallowing, but it's not going to lead to insane cravings the same way that devouring, tons of chips and chocolate and ice cream will. So that's something that comes to mind is that. And to me, it's kind of like a harm reduction approach. Other people might have more of a hard line, like, oh, I shouldn't even be eating anything because I'm not hungry. Maybe they're not hungry and they're just having this craving for ice cream or whatever it is. And then they're like, I'm not going to eat because I'm not hungry. I need to learn to like sit with these feelings. But in the approach that I just mentioned, it feels like it's kind of like harm reduction. Like, I'm going to eat, but I'm going to eat something that's not going to make a, have a as difficult as a challenging an impact on my body, physically, with all the sugars coursing through, or that'll cause like the mental obsession and the cravings. So that's something that comes to mind. And I actually think it's like a fairly decent strategy.
Hmm.
It's worked for me to just be like, man, I'm having these crazy cravings. And then my boyfriend and I will just make a huge steak dinner and have,
Hmm.
vegetables and, eggs or whatever we have. And it feels pretty satisfying. And although I have like the desire to maybe one day move beyond it and be like, can I actually, process what else is going on in a way that's not eating? But at the moment, I'm like, I'm actually pretty good with eating this big ass steak and whatever it is, and being okay with this for right now.
Yeah, I
100%.
would say like what you were saying is like spot on. So my journey with Elanie and everyone that we've interviewed on the podcast, so it's been like, 2 or 3 years, whatever. Truly, I've moved. I would say I'm keto-ish, paleo-ish, carnivore-ish, and I am so satiated. It's like the sugar thing. It's kind of a little bit irrelevant because I'm like, I eat like a queen every day, guys, and I am good. Like I don't need that like cheap ho-ho snack. Like that sounds like it's
Yeah.
for peasants, Like it's like I'm eating steak and broccoli and I feel so good. Like I
Hmm.
think true, like now where I'm at now, it's true. I grab my meat first, I grab my fat, I throw a veggie on it because it helps, kind of make it look prettier. I don't know. And I am so satiated, I don't need dessert. So I'm with you, and I agree for however long, like, but for right now, it's working so well, I'm not going to touch it.
Mm, hmm I think that's like the bio-individuality of it too, right?
Mhm.
Is that if that's what you need to do to be successful,
Yeah.
that's what you should do. And there's no right or wrong to that.
Mhm.
And in fact, you're really nourishing your body. And sometimes those cravings are coming because you have a nutrient deficiency and your body is looking for ways to fill it,
Yeah.
or
Mhm.
you're using more energy. Like let's say you've started a workout program. You may not realize, but if you haven't been exercising and you start exercising, then, which is like we talked about, really effective strategy for helping minimize cravings, you're also going to be hungry more often. So then it becomes all the more important to eat all the fat and all the protein so that you don't start exercising and then start craving carbs because your body is trying to rebuild those like stores of glucose and protein. So it's important to like monitor that. And then the other thing I'd say too, which I know we can't necessarily get into time-wise in detail, but getting enough sleep is so
Mhm.
crucial, and having good
Yes.
sleep hygiene and having good
Hmm.
quality sleep.
Good
It,
quality
Soup.
soup is also really
Good
Yes,
important.
quality
yes.
soup is also important. Good bone broth, good meat. Not just quantity, but quality of sleep. Because so often I talk to people, like my clients who are like, oh, well, I mean, I get like 7 hours of sleep. And I'm like, but do you get good REM sleep? Do you get good, why am I forgetting the second half of the sleep? The first one, deep sleep. Deep
Deep
sleep
soup.
comes first and then REM sleep. I'm like, is you getting good quality? And they don't know. And the truth is, just because you sleep at night doesn't mean it's good quality. It could be interrupted. You
Hmm.
could be getting poor deep sleep. You could be getting poor REM sleep. But both of those things are so important for like mitigating inflammation and mitigating cravings. And actually, willpower, which is our ability to say yes to things that are good for us and say no to things that are not good for us, is a finite resource. And you wake up with a limited amount of willpower every day and you use it up throughout the day. And so it's not as simple as like just having more willpower. That's like saying I'll just have more blood in my body. Like it physiologically doesn't happen. Willpower is a finite resource. And one of the things that depletes willpower is a bad night's sleep, which is
Hmm.
oftentimes why when we sleep poorly, we then wake up and are like, oh, forget it. I'm just going to have French toast for breakfast, or I'm just going to stop and get a donut on the way to work, right? And the other thing that depletes it is like alcohol, which is why when you drink alcohol, suddenly you feel okay with eating a whole pizza, whereas like you might not have done that before. But yeah, sleep is like one way to just kind of shoot your willpower right out the beginning. And then you wake up with less in the morning, and then becomes harder and harder to avoid those indulgences during the days. If you're at work and your coworker brought in pastries, like there's your first hurdle that requires willpower. So if you didn't have much to begin with and you use the last of it on that decision, then like guess what happens 2 hours later when it's your coworker's birthday and they have birthday cake? Like you're not going to have the willpower at that point to say no to that thing. So again, like maintaining your sleep and avoiding drinking excess alcohol are good ways to make sure that you have what you need to make the better decisions.
Yeah, and this is even on a micro scale. Studies have shown that even a single night of sleep deprivation changes the
Mm,
levels of our hunger and appetite hormones, leading to
100%.
increased hunger. And there's clear research that shows that sleep deprived individuals consume more calories, particularly from, ultra processed food. So this is even on the scale of like one night of sleep can have an impact.
And then I think like, so there's alternatives like we talked about to sweeteners that don't trigger that same craving response. They will continue the sweet, but once you're past that, like once you're past that need, you're past that habit, if you want to incorporate something that shouldn't create a dependency, things like honey and monk fruit and stevia can be helpful. And I still say do those things on occasions, right? Like if you want to make something special for a special brunch, or like like a Christmas morning brunch, and you want to do something like that, that's all good. I still wouldn't make it part of your day unless you're Kay and you know that you're going to be okay, I guess.
And it's like a tablespoon, guys. It's okay. Just a little bit.
And
Just
like
a little.
honey intake can increase serum antioxidant It can reduce inflammation. It lowers LDL, which is our quote unquote bad cholesterol. I don't
Mm.
like, you need cholesterol, you need LDL cholesterol. It literally builds your cells. So the fact that we've like villainized it so much is a shame. But it does also raise HDL, which is our protective cholesterol. It lowers triglycerides. It has antibacterial, antiviral activity. It has anti-tumor effects in animal studies. It improves our immune system. So, like raw honey can actually be a really good source if you need a sweetener. I wouldn't use it if you're heating it because then you can denature the enzymes. But stevia is another good alternative. It actually can lower blood sugar levels and
Actually, I heard that about allulose as well.
yeah, allulose also. And yeah, in the past, they actually used to use like ancient times, like Egyptian times, they actually used stevia to treat what was at that time recognized as diabetes. And then monk fruit is another option because it's like one thing that's beneficial about monk fruit is it's 250 times sweeter than sucrose. And so you just need a really tiny amount to have some of that like sweet component. And it does also have vitamin C. It has anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, anti-cancer effects. It can decrease your blood sugar. Those are good alternatives once you're past the point of dependency, craving, habit formation with
Mhm.
sugar. When you simply need something to replace it just on an occasional basis, those are good alternatives. And then I would say too, we talked about in our last podcast, Christina, we talked about how like sugar is oftentimes associated with memories, especially
Mhm.
surrounding like
Uh,
Christmas time or holidays
Yeah.
or family traditions or birthdays, how like you go back to a specific memory and you think of a food. So you think of like sitting down with your family and having apple pie or going to your grandmother's house and having homemade chocolate chip cookies. And we talked about that the reason for that is because sugar releases dopamine and dopamine helps with memory formation. That's why those things are typically specifically tied in with those memories. But the warmth and the love that you feel from those memories aren't from the sugar. They're from the community. They're from the relationships. They're from the loving, intimate interaction with that grandparent or that parent or your child. So, one thing I always recommend is forming new memories that don't circle around food. So, like, because the process of like being with a loved one also releases dopamine, which is why it's so sad that we're just on social media all the time, where we're comparing ourselves to people all the time. We're feeling like our life isn't good enough, our husbands aren't good enough, our families aren't good enough, and we're not like actually spending time with people like our husbands who could actually help us release the dopamine, or your boyfriend or your spouse or your significant other or whoever that is. So like we're avoiding actual relationships which do actually release dopamine to be on something that depletes our dopamine and isn't
Mhm.
real. So like build new traditions, be around people and build them around things that don't center around sugar. So like if you crave ice cream, perhaps it's because like you and your mom used to like eat ice cream and watch a movie together on Friday nights when you were a teenager. And then what you're actually craving is that memory, that time that you spent with her. So create a new tradition. If your mother has passed away or is still with you, do something new with her, but like do something with your family instead. Like start a Friday night tradition where you watch a movie and share a charcuterie board. Like have some protein, have some fat, spend that time, make it your tradition. Like, or if you crave cookies because it was like what your grandmother would make when you went to her house during the holidays, then like during the holidays, rather than making sugar cookies with your kids or your loved ones, make like homemade ornaments or make wreaths or like, I don't know, decorate ugly Christmas sweaters. Like, just do new things that create new fun memories. Go to an orchard and like pick your own fruit or go get your own pumpkin and carve a pumpkin. Like, things like that still release dopamine. They create those memories. They bring all the warmth and the love and the affection that came with those memories, but they don't center around sugar, and you remove that as a trigger. So that's kind of like my advice too. When what we're really craving, we think it's sugar. When we get to the holidays, we think
Mhm.
we crave sugar, but really what we're craving is the memories, the warmth, the traditions that we had when we were children growing up that we loved. And so we can just recreate those today in our lives in a way that doesn't circulate around an ingredient that is harming your health.
I think
Absolutely.
those are such good points. And I especially love the idea of, instead of making sugar cookies, decorate some ugly Christmas sweaters. I think that that one's golden right there. But I think basically what you're saying is seek true nourishment. Like if you are seeking a connection with a family member, if you look behind, these memories and associations with food, maybe it's something about connection, or wanting to do something with your family or your kids, and you're exploring like what could it be, instead of doing something that you think is actually nourishing you, but it's actually depleting your dopamine. It's not healthy. But what are alternatives? I like the ones that you gave, like what if we can just watch a movie and maybe eat something that is not cookies or ice cream? Or what if we could just watch a movie together and just like cuddle each other, or do our nails, or pet the dog, or decorate ugly Christmas sweaters. Like those are fantastic ideas, and these are ways that we can nourish ourselves and give ourselves warm memories and connect, but that these things are not going to sabotage our health, and they're going to be like sustainable.
Let's be the grandmas that our kids come to our house and we're like, get the steak from the cookie jar, friend. And they're like,
The
Grandma
beef
can't.
jerky.
Yep. Yeah, it'll just be like the beef jerky in the cookie jar. We're those grandmas.
I like that. I
Yep.
like
And
that.
I was thinking, and I forget who coined this phrase, but it's chase slow dopamine. So like
Mm,
nourish your body with things that we don't need the quick dopamine. Also nourish your life and your mind and your soul with those slower dopamine things, just like what you guys are
mm,
saying, and do the
hmm.
things that the reward is a little further out, where you have to really up your baseline of dopamine. So you're just a more generally happy person. So yeah, amazing. Good wisdom, girls. Good wisdom.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
being here.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks for
you.
having us on, Christina. It's always fun.
Of
I'm
course.
glad we got to chat for longer this time.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
guys.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much,
Thank
Christina.
you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.